AI will cure cancer. At least, that's what tech titans like Sam Altman and Larry Ellison would have you believe. But behind these sweeping promises lies a far more nuanced reality. One where artificial intelligence isn't some magic cure-all, but rather a powerful tool in medicine's evolving arsenal. There are two elements to this: the future risk and the current landscape. Both remain bogged down in a combination of technical and ethical issues, including hallucination, algorithmic bias, insurance bias, consent, data privacy, and skill atrophy, to name just a few. And although it's anything but magic, and despite the complex, ethically challenging environment in which it exists, artificial intelligence certainly has the potential to aid both patients and doctors in a number of ways. The challenge is discerning the true promise from all the hype.
With the use of technology like this is called point-of-care ultrasound. We didn't invent this one. This has been in the market for about 5 to 7, 8 years. So what we're trying to do is, with this technology and a smartphone or a tablet, you can just, as a person, you can press a button and start scanning a human body. So that's solving one problem, is that bringing technology to remote areas or faraway places. But you don't still have a second problem, which is you don't have doctors to interpret what they see as. We can only do that not by bringing doctors, because we don't have enough doctors, but by bringing AI running on a smartphone that helps a midwife somewhere in a remote area to really get some sense of what she or he is looking at.
That was Dr. Mohamed, an associate professor of computer vision at Mohammed bin Zayed University of Artificial Intelligence, who spent years working on medical imaging problems at the Institute of Biomedical Engineering at the University of Oxford. He's currently leading a team of more than 25 researchers, specifically to further explore the medical side of computer vision. His idea is to leverage AI as a means of making healthcare more accessible, affordable, and sustainable. And the kind of AI that we're talking about here has nothing to do with science fiction or hypotheticals. We're talking about relatively straightforward machine learning algorithms trained on specific data points to produce specific types of probabilistic outcomes. And these kinds of models are already doing a lot.
So the question we're trying to address in this project is, could you scan a patient through a CT scan or CT angiography and tell what are the risks of this patient to develop coronary artery disease, not tomorrow, not after a week, after a year or 2 or more? So if you can answer this question, you can create a risk profile for every one of us to say, this person has a likelihood of having coronary artery disease after a month. And that's the question we're trying to solve. And it turns out we can. We can solve it. We have some publication on that. We're working closely with many sites. And this is actually a big study run by the University of Oxford, and we're part of that as well, to develop AI solution that can look at CT angiography of the heart and predict heart attack way before it happens.
This idea of simple prediction goes far beyond heart disease.
Dementia is a major world problem. It happens at later age for people. And one of the major problem of it is it's not just one type. There are multiple types of dementia. The main type is Alzheimer's disease, but there are other types of dementia. The second type of dementia is called vascular dementia. The difference mainly, the Alzheimer damages part of the brain that mostly relate to, for instance, the hippocampus of the brain, where they affect the memory, while vascular dementia affect the vascular system in the brain. Both damages the brain, but in a different way, which means that the way you treat them is completely different. Currently, with the current technology we have, doctors find it very challenging to tell the difference between them at early stage. So what we did is created a method that takes a brain MRI scan, quantify it to 32 different structures, measure different characteristics on every one of these structures, and this is what you see in 3D here. And from that, uses AI to predict or to diagnose the type of dementia. And we show in recent publication that this actually can work with a very high degree of sensitivity, even much higher than what doctors do. This is smart, not because it's smart because it's been trained by data that has been analyzed by smart doctors. So it's all the effort that you combine AI with the technology, with the knowledge of many doctors.
When it comes to AI in cancer, prediction once again holds a lot of promise. Because prediction allows oncologists to tailor their treatment in advance, it allows for the promise of proactivity rather than reactivity.
It's important to understand if a patient what type of cancer the patient has, the level of cancer the patient has, the stage, and more important than that is that if a patient has cancer, what are the likelihoods or what are the future for this patient? If I remove the cancer by surgery or by chemotherapy or whatever, what's the likelihood of recall? What's the likelihood of death? What's the likelihood that this patient, if I use this type of treatment, this will work? And this is what we try to study here. The method that we develop, quantify and segment out the cancer and measure its severity, and on top of that tells you what is the likelihood of the outcomes in the future.
That's just a sampling of what's being done on the treatment side of this integration. Today, there are predictive models in development for a wide range of illnesses and diseases, ranging from a variety of cancers to periodontal disease, sepsis, hearing loss, and even glaucoma. Other systems are designed to help radiologists identify bone fractures and cancerous tumors on X-rays. And still others are designed to help reduce the administrative burden of doctors and nurses. And while that all sounds great, it is complicated. Hallucination, the propensity of language models to invent information that doesn't exist, still exists, and there's no real safeguard against it. Algorithmic bias, a clear result of biased datasets, can impact results in ways that are difficult to predict. In the hands of a human professional, we have a lot of potential. But if we lose the skills to verify and authenticate the output of these models, or if non-professionals over-rely on these systems, mistakes might be made. And in healthcare, the stakes are really, really high.
So when it comes to drug creations, what people were really excited about is this kind of like predicting out of the sample that you have seen. These perturbation models that can predict if I gave it this slightly different molecule that is similar to one that you have already seen, how would all of these genes be affected? And that is something that humans cannot predict. There's too many interactions, there's too many genes, and the model is not necessarily learning something mechanistic about the way that the drug is interacting with a protein, which is how a human would do it, but it's simply doing it based on the patterns that it sees of genes going up and down.
And the idea of deploying AI to accelerate drug development has become enormously popular, with several biotech pharmaceuticals firms, such as Lantern Pharma, Recursion Pharmaceuticals, and Isomorphic Labs, built around medical AI platforms that have already demonstrated the ability to drastically speed up the amount of time it takes for researchers to identify drug candidates. The problem with this, the reality behind the idea of an instant cure for illnesses, is that the identification of a drug candidate is only one step up a very long ladder that ends with mass production. Even if AI is able to speed up the identification part of the process, it can't shorten the clinical trial phase, which could last years. But the promise here goes beyond simple drug development and into something called computational biology, which refers to the application of computer and data science techniques to better understand our own biology. And according to Dr. Eduardo Beltrame, an assistant professor of computational biology at MBZ UAI, AI is accelerating this field, something that puts personal healthcare firmly within reach.
The big thing that has consistently changed is the amount of data that we can generate, and then how we work with that data. In the 50s, in the 40s, in the beginnings of molecular biology, you did a very simple experiment. For example, you run a gel, and then you had a simple readout that was like, is my protein here or not? What size is it? You could figure out what was going on and do the data analysis by hand, by just looking at your experimental results. As we generate more and more data and we measure different things, like I was saying, it doesn't scale, like working with the data that you are generating by hand. That's where you need computers, and that's where you need artificial intelligence. You need to figure out from first principles, okay, how do I want to deal with these different types of situations? You know how you would work with one protein if you're doing an experiment, but now if you're measuring all of the genes, all of the possible transcripts that are present in the cell, all of the different classes of proteins that you have in the cell, you can't do that by hand. The big change, I think, that's happening, that is what differentiates traditional bioinformatics and statistics to now this more AI-like stuff, is the scale of data. Because with the Human Genome Project, we generated a lot of data, but we were using statistical methods to do alignment and work with that. When you don't have a whole lot of data and you need to draw a conclusion to figure out, like, did my experiment work or not, you use the statistics. You have 10, 20, 100 samples. But when you have millions of samples, each one the same, roughly the same amount of data that you generated in one experiment before, then you start being able to use these other techniques from machine learning and artificial intelligence that were not possible to use before because you simply didn't have enough data. The really big thing that is going to be unlocked is personalized health. And I'm not even talking about like personalized medicine, which is deciding which drug is going to work for you or making a drug that works for you, but really providing a comprehensive assessment and suggestion of what broad holistic lifestyle and habits and interventions are going to work for you based on your molecular profile. That's a thing that people have been talking about for decades. Precision medicine is not a new concept, and maybe it has been slow to bear fruit because it really demands very large amounts of data that until recently we didn't have enough data. We didn't have enough statistical power to draw a conclusion that applies for you. Because in biology, there's tremendous heterogeneity, which means there's tremendous difference between individuals, there's tremendous differences between your cells. In science, we are used to working with reductionistic techniques, where you model a few things, and you do the experiment several times, and then you figure out, okay, this is my number. But when you have thousands or millions of variables, then you would also need to collect a correspondingly large amount of samples. And you can think of it in terms of like developing diagnostics. I get your molecular profile and I want to predict which type of asthma do you have? Or I want to say which type of drug is going to work for your type of asthma. And developing that is primarily a matter of collecting enough data with the labels or the outcomes that you're interested in. Right now, the diagnostics that we have, they're very coarse. We're not able to go very deep into different subtypes of diseases, and when we do, they're often uncertain. If we're able to just collect more data with this kind of high molecular resolution, this becomes a straightforward problem in machine learning. The other thing that is very exciting and which I think is going to take a little more time is these predictive models that can generalize outside of the distribution that they have been trained on. You know, you can think of like, this is the range of the data that I collected. If I am predicting stuff in here, then I am doing interpolation. But if I am predicting stuff out of the sample, then I'm doing extrapolation. So people talk a lot about now perturbation models, which is you have a cell culture and you give it certain drugs and you want to ask, how are these drugs going to affect the immune pathways in this cell? And you may have given it a collection of drugs that you have a known chemical structure, and then you're like, here's one that has a different chemical structure that you never saw before. Can you predict how is this going to affect the immune system? That's a harder problem. It's also harder to validate. But what I think is really exciting is diagnostics, patient stratification, matching people based on what is going to work for them. That is going to happen in the next 5 years.
For both the application and biological side of things, we're not dealing with magic. We're dealing with math.
AI and specifically machine learning as data-driven approaches, which relies on data to try to understand how to perform a task. For instance, if you want an AI algorithm to tell you if a patient has a brain tumor or normal or no brain tumor, you really need to provide it with lots and lots of cases for normal and abnormal cases and run these algorithms so they can figure out some patterns to distinguish normal from abnormal. Now, there's an important aspect here that these algorithms will work, or the output of them will be as good as the data. What I mean by that, the more the data, the better. But more importantly, the more curated data, the more clean data, the better. But it's on top of that, it's not just the data. You need to make sure that there's diversity in the data. So if you bring the data from one hospital, what's the likelihood it's going to work on a different ethnicity? So what I'm trying to say here is data and it's how clean it is is the engine of to make that AI model work better.
If I give the model like a new chemical structure, for example, and I say, please predict what is the outcome of this going to be. The model is going to give me a prediction, but it may not be correct. I will have to go there and do an experiment to validate that prediction. Now, if you are doing interpolation, which is a classifier that is just predicting the label from within the distribution that the model was trained on, that's a much simpler problem. That is the kind of thing that the FDA is used to. The methods by which you get the diagnostic may be new, but the proposal of like having a classifier to predict the label based on the scene distribution, that is a common thing. We were talking about precision diagnostics earlier. There's a number of companies in the US that have been bringing this kind of precision diagnostics for cancer into market. So far, almost every single one of the precision diagnostics that we have are based on the genome, are based on DNA. And the next step would be, can we take dynamic data into account? Can we take the transcriptome, where your immune system is changing over time, over the course of a day? Instead of just saying like you have 50% chance of developing this or that type of asthma, we would say we predict that you're going to have an asthma flare-up in 2 weeks, based on how your immune system dynamics has been going.
Now it sounds good. It sounds really, really good. But we're not talking about instant cures for diseases. We're talking about data-driven approaches to give both a more holistic and granular view of each specific patient at a level of specificity that's beyond what a human alone can do. Here's where things get tricky. None of this exists in a vacuum. These data-driven approaches require a lot of data, which raises enormous issues of data security and data privacy. When we're talking about data regarding someone's genome and predictions regarding someone's likelihood of developing cancer, for instance, we're talking about highly sensitive data. Imagine if insurance providers gained access to it and refused coverage for someone that was classified as high risk. That's something that we do not have regulation addressing.
Let's look at the different perspective that when we talk AI, we talk about technology. We're human. We don't trust technology as much as we trust each other. So when AI is deployed in the hospital settings and make one mistake, what would happen? I mean, we know that in hospital settings, actually the third leading cause of death worldwide, statistic by WHO, is actually unintentional injuries / errors by human. So we make lots of mistakes. Now let's come back to the question about the ethical consideration and the problem that actually could arise with AI. It's an interesting technology that could be very helpful, and that's actually helpful in our life. But it has problems such as that we should be aware of, such as privacy. AI, it is trained on data. This data is your data, my data, everyone's data. Will that be a problem? Because when it comes to privacy, will people use my data to use it in an incorrect way? So that's one question people are concerned about. And there are mitigation processes in place where government bodies and regulators are putting to ensure that the privacy of patients and all stakeholders when it comes to AI in healthcare are preserved. But still, there is a long way to go to where we convince and reach to the proper trust with patients. And that's the second problem that we still have in healthcare, in AI in healthcare, which is trust and acceptability. I've seen it myself because I've been trying to deploy AI solutions in the healthcare system, and I've seen doctors rejecting to use that. That's a few years ago. We've seen that this is changing, and we have more trust and acceptability by doctors, but we still have to convince not just doctors, but also patients and families and many other stakeholders. And there are many other problems that we can also think about, but every technology has its advantages and disadvantages. But when it comes into weighing these advantages and disadvantages, we can clearly see that there's an evidence of that the use of AI in healthcare has a much more advantages than disadvantages. With the proper regulation, proper mitigation, and proper processes in place, we should be able to utilize AI and deploy it in the best way possible in the healthcare industry.
It all comes down to a balance between man and machine, a balance that needs to be informed by people who understand the kind of technology that we're dealing with. It's not an artificial intelligence, it's algorithms, data and math. But algorithms, data, and math are more than enough to be wholly transformative.